My parents took over my office and gave it to my brother so he could stream full-time. I stayed quiet, but when I moved out with just one document, they were begging me to reverse it. My name's Adam. I'm 28, and until just last month, I was a thriving software engineer. I worked remotely from this incredible home office I'd built myself, brick by brick, with my own hard-earned money. It was my sanctuary, a place where I truly excelled. Then, my parents decided. My younger brother, Jared, needed my space for his new streaming career. I stayed silent as they systematically dismantled everything I'd created, but they never, ever knew about the old, faded document tucked away in my grandfather's antique chest. The day I moved out, with that single piece of paper carefully packed, their desperate calls began. When I graduated college 6 years ago with my computer science degree, housing prices in our area were absolutely insane. My parents, Richard and Diana, suggested I move back home, temporarily, just to save up for a down payment. It sounded like a win-win. I'd contribute to household expenses, they'd get some extra income, and I'd build my savings. Our house was a 4-bedroom in a nice suburban neighborhood, the house I grew up in, with plenty of space for everyone. Jared, my younger brother, was 17 then, still in high school, and his room was right next to mine. The 4th bedroom? That was the guest room, mostly empty. During my senior year, I landed a job at a promising tech startup. They were really forward-thinking, even offering remote work options a couple of days a week. I asked my parents if I could convert that unused guest room into a proper home office, promising to cover all the renovation costs myself. They readily agreed, probably thinking it was an improvement to the house. I ended up spending close to $3,000 transforming that space. I'm talking professional lighting, ergonomic furniture, a custom-built desk that wrapped around 2 walls, even soundproofing panels to block out noise during video calls. My dual monitor setup, mechanical keyboard, and high-end chair weren't luxuries. They were investments in my future. That room became my sanctuary, my fortress of focus. Over the next few years, my career just exploded. 2 promotions, substantial raises, and increased responsibilities as the startup grew. My boss was incredibly impressed with my productivity, and eventually, they approved my request to work remotely full-time. This allowed me to save even more money, all while contributing a hefty $1,500 monthly to my parents for rent and utilities, which, let me tell you, was well above market rate for a single room. Meanwhile, Jared was charting a very different course. After barely scraping through high school, he bounced from one passion to the next. Community college? 1 semester. Local grocery store? 2 months. Couldn't handle early mornings. Then he decided he was a musician. Convinced my parents to buy him an expensive electric guitar. 3 weeks later, that guitar was collecting dust in his room. Through all of this, my parents showed an almost unbelievable amount of patience and financial support. They'd assure him he'd find his path. Their approach to my life was a stark contrast. When I struggled with difficult college courses, their advice was a blunt, work harder. When I needed a laptop for programming, I worked extra shifts at my campus job to save up. The difference in treatment was subtle, but it was there, a constant undercurrent. Despite this, I genuinely thought I had a good relationship with my family. I helped around the house, fixed their tech issues, even tutored Jared when he briefly feigned interest in programming. I believed our arrangement was working for everyone. My parents had extra income, I was saving money, and I had a professional workspace vital for my career. My company dealt with sensitive client information, so a dedicated, secure, quiet space wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. I'd explained this to my parents when setting up my office, and they seemed to understand. For 3 years, this system ran like a well-oiled machine. I was on track to have enough saved for a down payment within another year. I had no reason to suspect anything would change. My office was established, my contributions significant, my career soaring. I even helped my parents with their own financial planning, and my mom often bragged to her friends about my responsibility. My dad would occasionally peek into my office, nod approvingly, and go about his day. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The way my parents sometimes still referred to it as the guest room. The increasing frequency of Jared barging in to use my superior internet for his gaming sessions, the casual comments about how lucky I was to have such a nice workspace. But I was oblivious, caught up in my routine, planning my future. I had no idea that my comfortable arrangement was about to be obliterated, or that my carefully constructed professional space would become the epicenter of a family conflict that would change everything. The day everything went sideways started like any other. I'd just wrapped up a productive work session, about to break for dinner, when my mom knocked on my office door. "Adam, your father wants a family meeting after dinner," she said, her expression unreadable. Family meetings were rare in our house, reserved for major announcements or serious issues. A knot immediately tightened in my stomach. I nodded, agreeing to be there. Dinner was disturbingly quiet. My father seemed preoccupied, my mother avoided eye contact. And Jared had this barely suppressed excitement about him that made me increasingly uneasy. After we finished eating, we gathered in the living room. My father cleared his throat. "We have something important to discuss," he began, glancing at my mother for support. "Jared has decided on his career path, and we want to support him fully." Jared puffed out his chest, grinning. "I'm going to be a content creator, a streamer. I've researched successful channels, and with the right setup, I could be making thousands of dollars a month." I nodded cautiously, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This wasn't Jared's first new passion. I had my doubts about streaming as a career, especially given his track record, but I tried to be supportive. "That sounds interesting," I said. "What kind of content are you planning?" "Gaming, mostly, but also reaction videos, challenges, whatever's trending," Jared replied vaguely. "The important thing is building a following, and for that, I need a professional setup." My father jumped in before I could respond. "And that's what we wanted to talk to you about, Adam. Jared needs a proper space to pursue this opportunity. We've decided that he should use your office room." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked from my father to my mother, searching for any sign that this was a joke. Their faces remained utterly serious. "But that's my office," I stammered, struggling to keep my voice level. "I need it for my job. My actual job that pays the bills." My mother reached out to pat my hand, a gesture that felt patronizing. "Honey, you can work from your bedroom. You have a desk in there already." "A small desk," I countered, my voice rising. "Not nearly enough space for my equipment, and my bedroom doesn't have the soundproofing I need for client calls. I spent thousands of dollars converting that room, specifically for work purposes." My father waved away my concerns dismissively. "You can make it work. Family supports each other, and right now Jared needs our support. He has a real chance to make something of himself here." I turned to look at my brother, who was already mentally redecorating my office. "And what about my support?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "I've been contributing significantly to this household for years. I pay rent, utilities, help with maintenance. Does that count for nothing?" "Don't be dramatic," my father said, waving his hand. "No one is saying your contributions aren't appreciated, but you have a stable job already. Jared is just starting out." "Starting out for the fifth time," I muttered, earning a glare from both my parents. "We've made our decision," my mother stated firmly. "Jared will move his streaming equipment into the office next weekend. That gives you plenty of time to relocate your things to your bedroom." I looked at each of their faces, searching for any sign of compromise, any glimmer of understanding. There was none. To them, this was already settled. My carefully created workspace, the environment that had allowed me to excel professionally, was being handed over to my brother for his latest whim. "Do I at least get a reduction in rent?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Since I'm losing a significant amenity?" My parents exchanged glances. "Your brother isn't in a position to contribute financially yet," my father said. "Once his streaming takes off, we can revisit the financial arrangements." The unfairness of it all was staggering. Not only was I losing my office, but I was expected to continue paying the same amount while my brother contributed absolutely nothing. I opened my mouth to argue further, but the sheer determination in my parents' eyes told me it would be utterly pointless. Over the next few days, I tried, desperately, to find a compromise. I suggested converting part of the basement into a streaming space for Jared. I offered to help him set up in his own bedroom, which was actually slightly larger than mine. I even proposed a timeshare arrangement, where we could both use the office during different hours. Each suggestion was shot down. The basement was too damp for electronics. Jared's bedroom needed to remain a place of rest, not work. Sharing the space wouldn't allow either of us to properly establish our work environment. The real reasons behind their refusal were transparent. My needs were simply not as important as Jared's latest dream. By the weekend, I had no choice but to comply. I spent hours carefully disconnecting my equipment, untangling the elaborate cable management system I had meticulously created. I watched as Jared bounced around excitedly, pointing out where he'd put his new gaming chair, how he'd arrange his streaming lights. "This room is perfect," he exclaimed, without a shred of acknowledgement that it was perfect because I had made it so. Moving everything into my bedroom was a nightmare. The space was cramped, with barely enough room for my twin bed and small dresser. I had to position my desk against the foot of my bed, making it difficult to even pull out the chair properly. My second monitor, an essential tool, had nowhere to go, so it ended up stored in my closet. The professional backdrop I used for video calls no longer fit, meaning clients would now see my rumpled bed in the background. That night, lying in bed with my desk looming at my feet, I felt a profound sense of being undervalued, of being completely taken for granted. Despite years of being the responsible, contributing member of the household, my needs had been casually dismissed in favor of my brother's latest fantasy. The message was crystal clear. In this family, Jared's whims would always take precedence over my stability. It was the first major crack in my relationship with my parents. And though I didn't realize it then, it was the beginning of a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the biggest decision of my adult life. The impacts of losing my office became apparent almost immediately. My first Monday working from my bedroom was an absolute disaster. The space was so cramped that I knocked over my coffee, reaching for my mouse, nearly short-circuiting my keyboard. During a video call with my team, my manager commented on my new cozy setup, clearly noticing the downgrade. I mumbled something about renovations, too embarrassed to admit the truth. Noise was another significant issue. My bedroom shared a wall with what was now Jared's streaming studio, and the soundproofing I had installed only worked one way. While my calls wouldn't disturb him, his enthusiastic commentary during games penetrated my wall effortlessly. Several times during important meetings, I had to mute myself to hide his shouting in the background. "Is everything okay at home?" my manager asked during our weekly one-on-one call. "I've noticed you seem distracted lately, and your last code submission had several errors we don't typically see from you." I assured her everything was fine, but it wasn't. My productivity was suffering, and I knew it. The physical discomfort of my new workspace combined with the constant noise distractions made focusing nearly impossible. For the first time in my career, I found myself falling behind on deadlines. Meanwhile, Jared's streaming career was off to a predictably rocky start. Despite having taken over my perfect office setup, he struggled to maintain a consistent schedule. Some days, he'd stream for 12 hours straight, making it impossible for me to concentrate. Other days, he wouldn't stream at all, leaving the valuable space completely unused while I hunched over my cramped desk. 2 weeks after the change, I approached my parents in the kitchen while Jared was out with friends. "I need to discuss the current arrangement," I began carefully. "It's seriously affecting my work performance." My father barely looked up from his newspaper. "You just need time to adjust. Change is always difficult at first." "It's more than that," I insisted. "The noise from Jared's streaming is interfering with my client calls. I had to reschedule an important meeting yesterday because he was shouting about losing a game." My mother sighed. "Have you tried using headphones? Or perhaps you could schedule your important calls when he takes breaks." "That's just it," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "He doesn't have a schedule. I never know when he'll be streaming or when he'll be yelling. And why should I have to work around him? My job actually pays the bills." "Your brother is building his future," my mother replied defensively. "These early days are crucial for establishing his channel. He needs to stream when the audience is most active." "And how many followers does he have after 2 weeks of this?" I asked pointedly. My parents exchanged glances. "These things take time," my father said vaguely. I later learned from Jared himself that he had accumulated a grand total of 27 followers, most of whom were his high school friends. His viewership rarely exceeded 3 people at any given time. Yet, my parents continued to treat his streaming as though it were a budding empire rather than another passing interest. The financial inequity of the situation became increasingly galling. I was still paying $1,500 monthly for what amounted to a cramped bedroom, while Jared contributed nothing. In fact, my parents had purchased additional equipment for his streaming setup, including a high-end microphone and lighting system that cost nearly $1,000. One evening, I overheard them discussing the household finances in the kitchen. The electric bill is higher this month, my mother noted with concern. It's all those computers and lights running in Jared's studio, my father replied. Maybe we should ask Adam to increase his contribution to cover the difference. After all, he's still saving money by living here. I retreated to my room before they could see me, seething with indignation. Not only had I lost my workspace and was expected to maintain the same rent, but now they were considering charging me extra to subsidize my brother's hobby. The situation at work continued to deteriorate. My manager scheduled a formal check-in to discuss my recent performance issues. She was sympathetic, but firm. If I couldn't maintain my previous standards, the company might need to reconsider the remote work arrangement. Perhaps, coming into the office a few days a week would help you refocus, she suggested. The company office was a 90-minute commute each way, which would add 3 hours to my workday. But I was running out of options. I'll consider it, I promised, knowing that such a change would further reduce my ability to save for my own place. At home, the tension continued to mount. Jared began treating the entire house as an extension of his studio. He'd film reaction videos in the living room, making it unavailable for anyone else. He stored equipment in the hallway, creating obstacles to navigate. He even began to use my car without asking when he needed to pick up new accessories for his setup. Family supports each other, my mother reminded me when I objected to finding my gas tank empty for the 3rd time. The most infuriating part was that Jared showed no appreciation for any of it. He complained when the internet briefly went down, blaming me for using too much bandwidth with my work calls. He grumbled that the office chair I had left behind wasn't really gaming quality and persuaded our parents to buy him a new one. He even had the audacity to ask if he could borrow my second monitor that was sitting unused in my closet. It would really improve my stream quality, he argued. You're not even using it right now. I'm not using it because I have nowhere to put it, I pointed out, and it's not sitting idle by choice. Despite my refusal, I returned from a grocery run the following day to find my monitor missing from the closet. It was now prominently displayed on Jared's desk. When confronted, he shrugged. Mom said it was fine since you weren't using it anyway. That night, I began searching apartment listings on my phone. I hadn't saved nearly as much as I had hoped, but the situation was becoming untenable. I would have to adjust my expectations and look for something smaller, farther from the city, or with roommates. Anything would be better than continuing in an environment where my needs and boundaries were consistently disregarded. I kept my apartment hunting quiet, not wanting to deal with guilt trips or manipulative arguments. I worked out my budget, calculating how much of my savings I could allocate to moving expenses and how it would affect my long-term financial goals. The numbers were tight, but manageable. As I organized my financial documents one evening, preparing for potential rental applications, I made a discovery that would change everything. A discovery that would finally give me the leverage to stand up for myself after years of being the family doormat. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when I decided to sort through the stack of documents I'd accumulated over the years. Rental applications required proof of income, identification, and sometimes reference letters. As I dug through my filing box, I came across a folder I hadn't opened in years, simply labeled Grandfather's Papers. My paternal grandfather had passed away 5 years earlier. He and I had always been close, bonding over our shared interest in technology. He'd been an electrical engineer in his day, and he often told me I had inherited his analytical mind. When he died, my parents had given me a small wooden chest containing some of his personal belongings, mostly photos and a few small keepsakes. I had stored most of the contents, including this folder, without thoroughly examining them. Curious, I opened the folder and began flipping through the documents. Most were old photographs, certificates, and letters. But one official-looking document caught my eye. It was a property deed for my parents' house, dated 15 years ago. What made me pause was not the deed itself, but the names listed as property owners: Richard Wilson, Diana Wilson, and Adam Wilson ***. My name was on the deed. According to this legal document, I owned 25% of my parents' house. I stared at the paper in disbelief, reading and rereading the text to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. The language was clear. My grandfather had purchased a quarter share of the house and had it legally transferred to my name when I was 13 years old. Memories began flooding back. I recalled a conversation with my grandfather shortly before his 15th birthday. "I've arranged a little something for your future," he had said with a twinkle in his eye. "Something to give you a solid foundation when you're ready to build your life." I had assumed he was referring to the savings bonds he had given me, which I had later used to help pay for college. I never imagined he had given me partial ownership of the very house I was living in. My parents had never mentioned this. Not when I moved back home after college. Not when we discussed my rent contribution. Not even when they decided to take away my office. They had been charging me rent for a property I partially owned. The implications were staggering. As a part owner, I had legal rights they had completely disregarded. The decision to repurpose my office should have required my consent. The rent I had been paying should have been adjusted to reflect my ownership stake. Every major household decision should have included me as a stakeholder. My first instinct was to confront them immediately, deed in hand, and demand answers. But as the initial shock subsided, a more calculated approach formed in my mind. This document was leverage, and timing its revelation would be crucial. I took a photo of the deed with my phone, then carefully returned the original to the folder. I needed to verify its legitimacy and understand exactly what rights it granted me. For that, I needed professional advice. The next day, during my lunch break, I called my friend Brian, who worked as a real estate attorney. Without revealing too many personal details, I explained the situation and asked if he could verify the deed's validity. "Send me a copy and I'll take a look," he offered. Property records are public, so it should be easy to confirm. 2 days later, Brian called back. "The deed is legitimate," he confirmed. "According to county records, you do indeed own a 25% stake in that property. Has been recorded that way for 15 years. What does that mean legally?" I asked. "It means you have rights as a partial owner," Brian explained. "You cannot be evicted without due process. Major decisions affecting the property technically require your consent. And if you wanted to, you could force a partition sale, though that's usually a last resort in family situations. A partition sale would mean forcing the sale of the entire property and splitting the proceeds according to ownership percentages. It was a nuclear option I had no intention of pursuing, but the knowledge that I had such recourse was empowering. "What about the rent they've been charging me?" I inquired. Brian sighed. "That's a bit more complicated. If there was no formal rental agreement acknowledging your ownership stake, you might have grounds to reclaim some of those payments, but that would likely require litigation, and family lawsuits get messy fast." I thanked Brian for his insights, my mind already working through various scenarios. I didn't want to destroy my relationship with my family, but I desperately needed to establish boundaries and gain respect. The deed provided a path to both. Over the next few weeks, I intensified my apartment search while carefully observing the family dynamics. My parents continued to prioritize Jared's streaming endeavors. Despite minimal progress, he had upgraded to a streaming schedule posted on the refrigerator, which he rarely followed. His follower count had increased marginally, mostly through aggressively spamming his high school social network. Meanwhile, I had found a promising apartment, a one-bedroom unit in a modern building about 20 minutes from my workplace. The rent was higher than my contribution at home, but the space was entirely mine, with no risk of sudden repurposing. I submitted an application and was approved within days. With my exit plan secured, I developed a strategy for revealing my ownership stake. I wouldn't use it as a weapon, but as a shield against any attempts to maintain financial control over me after I moved out. I anticipated that my parents might expect me to continue contributing to household expenses even after leaving, as they had hinted at such expectations when Jared's older sister briefly moved out 2 years earlier. The timing had to be perfect. I would announce my plans to move, observe their reaction, and only reveal the deed if necessary to establish clear boundaries. My goal was not revenge, but respect and recognition of my autonomy. As I packed my belongings discreetly, I reflected on my grandfather's foresight. He had always been concerned about the family's tendency to favor Jared, though he never criticized my parents directly. The property deed was his way of ensuring I would have leverage when needed, a safeguard against exactly the kind of situation I now found myself in. Always have an ace up your sleeve, Adam, he used to tell me. Not to cheat, but to protect yourself when the game turns unfair. The game had indeed turned unfair, and it was time to play the ace my grandfather had thoughtfully provided. I marked my calendar for the family meeting I planned to call, setting the date for exactly 1 week before my apartment would be ready. The confrontation I had been avoiding for years was finally on the horizon, and for the first time, I felt prepared to face it. I chose a Sunday evening for the family meeting, knowing everyone would be home. My apartment lease was signed, the security deposit paid, and moving arrangements confirmed. The only remaining step was to inform my family of my decision and establish the new boundaries our relationship would require. I entered the living room at 7 o'clock sharp, finding my parents already seated on the couch, expressions of mild curiosity on their faces. Jared slouched in the armchair, barely looking up from his phone. "Thanks for meeting with me," I began, standing. Rather than sitting to maintain a position of authority, "I have an announcement to make." My father raised his eyebrows. "You're not usually one for announcements. Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I assured him. "Better than fine, actually. I've signed a lease on an apartment. I will be moving out next Saturday." There was a moment of surprised silence before my mother spoke. "Well, this is sudden. I thought you were saving for a down payment on a house." "Plans change," I replied simply. "The apartment is close to work and fits my needs perfectly." My father frowned, clearly calculating something in his head. "This seems impulsive, Adam. Have you worked out the finances?" "Renting means throwing money away instead of building equity." "I'm aware of how renting works," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "My finances are in order." Jared finally looked up from his phone. "Can I have your bedroom when you leave? I could use the extra space for my equipment." I ignored him, keeping my focus on my parents. "I wanted to give you proper notice and make sure we're all clear on the arrangements going forward." My mother nodded, her expression shifting to something resembling relief. "Well, you're 28. It's about time you had your own place. We'll miss your help around here, of course." "About that," my father interjected, "I assume you'll still be contributing to the household expenses. Your brother's career is just taking off, and we could use the continued support during this transition period." And there it was, exactly as I had anticipated. Even as I was leaving, they expected me to continue financially supporting the family, particularly Jared's career. "No," I stated firmly. "I will not be contributing to this household after I move out. My financial obligations here will end when I leave." My father's expression darkened. "That seems rather selfish, Adam. After all we've done for you, allowing you to live here below market rate. To save money." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Below market rate? I have been paying $1,500 a month for a bedroom. That is well above market rate for a single room in this area." "This isn't just any house," my mother argued. "This is your family home, and family supports each other. Family support should go both ways," I pointed out. "My office was taken away without discussion. My equipment was used without permission. My boundaries have been repeatedly violated. And now you expect me to continue financing this household from afar." My father stood up, his face flushing with anger. "You've had it easy here, Adam. Do you have any idea what housing costs these days? Good luck paying your bills without our help." Something snapped inside me. After years of being the responsible one, of contributing far more than my share, of having my needs dismissed for Jared's whims, I had reached my limit. Without your help, I repeated incredulously. I have been subsidizing this household for years. And as for housing costs, I am well aware of property values in this area, including the value of this house of which I own 25%. The room went completely silent. My mother's face drained of color. My father froze mid-gesture. Even Jared looked up in confusion. "What did you just say?" my father finally managed. With deliberate calm, I removed the folded deed from my pocket and handed it to him. "Grandfather left me a quarter ownership of this house when I was 13. It's all legally documented and recorded with the county. I have been paying rent on a property I partially owned for the past 6 years." My father unfolded the document with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the text. My mother moved beside him, reading over his shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "This cannot be right," she whispered. "Your grandfather would have told us." "He did tell you," I said, recalling information Brian had shared from the property records. "The deed transfer required your signatures as the majority owners. You both signed the papers 15 years ago." My father's face cycled through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, anger, and finally a dawning realization. "We thought it was a college trust fund arrangement," he said weakly. "Your grandfather explained it as a legal formality to secure your educational future. We never understood it was actual property ownership. Whether this was true or a hasty fabrication, I couldn't tell, but it didn't matter now." "Well, now you understand," I said evenly. "And as a co-owner of this property, I am informing you that I will be moving out, and I expect my ownership stake to be respected going forward." "What does that mean exactly?" my mother asked, her voice small. "It means several things," I explained. "First, I will not be paying any more rent or household contributions after I leave. Second, any major decisions regarding the property legally require my consent. And third, we need to discuss fair compensation for my ownership share." Jared, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, so you own part of our house? Does that mean I've been streaming from your property this whole time?" "Yes," I confirmed. "The office you are using is partially mine, as is your bedroom, the living room, and every other part of this house." My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is ridiculous. You can't just spring this on us and make demands. We are your parents." "I'm not making demands," I clarified. "I am stating facts and asserting my legal rights. Rights that should have been acknowledged years ago." My mother began to cry softly. "How can you do this to us, Adam, after everything we have done for you?" "The guilt trip might have worked in the past, but not anymore." "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied calmly. "I am simply acknowledging the reality of our situation, a reality that has been documented for 15 years but conveniently ignored." "So what do you want?" my father demanded. "Money? Is that it?" "I want respect," I said firmly. "I want acknowledgement of my contributions and my rights. And yes, eventually I want fair compensation for my ownership share of this property. But mostly I want to be treated as an equal member of this family, not a resource to be exploited." The tension in the room was palpable. My father looked as though he might explode, while my mother continued to sob quietly. Jared appeared genuinely confused, his worldview visibly shifting as he processed this new information. "I'll give you time to digest this," I said, turning toward the stairs. "I am still moving out on Saturday as planned. We can discuss the property situation after I am settled in my new place. I suggest you consult with a lawyer to understand your options." As I walked upstairs to my room, I heard my father's angry voice and my mother's pleading tones, though I couldn't make out their exact words. Jared's confused questions floated up the stairwell. Their world had just been upended, much as mine had been when they took away my office without consideration. The difference was that I had legal documentation on my side and a plan for moving forward that did not involve burning bridges completely. I had no desire to force a sale of the family home or to cause genuine financial hardship. I simply wanted my family to recognize that their actions had consequences and that I would no longer accept being taken for granted. As I closed my bedroom door behind me, I felt a strange mixture of Emotions, vindication, sadness, anxiety, and most surprisingly, a profound sense of relief. 4. The first time in years, I had stood up for myself without compromise. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms, with the leverage my grandfather had thoughtfully provided. The week leading up to my move was tense, but surprisingly quiet. My parents seemed to be processing the revelation about my ownership stake, alternating between angry muttering and awkward silence whenever I entered a room. Jared, for his part, had become uncharacteristically subdued, his streaming sessions shorter and less frequent. I focused on packing and finalizing, moving arrangements, maintaining a calm, businesslike demeanor throughout. The night before my departure, my father knocked on my bedroom door. "We need to talk about this situation," he said stiffly. "Your mother and I have consulted our lawyer." "I'm happy to discuss it," I replied. "But any formal negotiations should probably include my attorney as well." His eyebrows shot up. "You have a lawyer now?" "I have a friend who specializes in real estate law," I explained. "He has advised me on my options." My father's expression hardened. "So, this is how it's going to be. Legal threats and negotiations?" "We are family, Adam." "Yes, we are family," I agreed. "And families should treat each other with respect and consideration. That has not been my experience." Lately, he started to argue, but stopped himself with visible effort. "Fine, we'll wait until you are settled in your new place, but this needs to be resolved." The next morning, I loaded the last of my belongings into the moving truck I had rented. My mother made a tearful appearance, attempting to guilt me one final time. "I just don't understand why you're doing this to us," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "We gave you a home when you needed one, and I paid well above market rate for the privilege," I reminded her gently, while owning a quarter of the property. She had no response to that. As I prepared to leave, Jared emerged from the house looking uncomfortable. "So, are you really part owner of the house?" he asked, awkwardly. "Yes, I am," I confirmed. He shuffled his feet. "And you never said anything all this time." "I didn't know until recently," I told him honestly. "Grandfather left me the deed, but I only discovered it while organizing my papers for the move." Jared nodded slowly. "That's kind of a big deal." "It is," I agreed. "Are you going to make us sell the house?" he asked, a note of genuine concern in his voice. "That is not my intention," I assured him. "But some things will need to change." With that, I got into the truck and drove away from my family home, heading toward a new chapter of my life. My apartment was everything I had hoped for: modern, quiet, and most importantly, entirely mine. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. At work, my productivity immediately improved in my new distraction-free environment. My manager commented on the positive change during our next one-on-one meeting. "Whatever adjustments you've made seem to be working," she noted approvingly. "Your last code submission was back to your usual high standards." I smiled. Sometimes you need to make big changes to get back on track. By the end of my first week in the new apartment, the calls and texts from my parents began. At first, they were a mixture of guilt trips and demands for meetings. I responded calmly but firmly, stating that I was open to discussions, but only with proper legal representation present. "This is absurd," my father texted. "We don't need lawyers to talk to our own son. We do when the discussion involves property rights and financial agreements," I replied. Eventually, they agreed to my terms. We scheduled a meeting for the following weekend at a neutral location, a conference room in Brian's law office building. Both sides would bring legal representation. In the meantime, I received an unexpected visit from Jared. He showed up at my apartment, unannounced, shifting uncomfortably when I opened the door. "Nice place," he commented, looking around. "Can I come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside to let him enter. He wandered around the living room, taking in the clean, organized space. "My streaming isn't going great," he admitted. Suddenly, "I can't figure out all the technical stuff you used to help me with." I nodded but offered no immediate assistance. He continued, "And Mom and Dad are freaking out about this whole house situation. Dad keeps saying we might have to take out a second mortgage to buy you out." "That is one option," I acknowledged. "There are others we can discuss during our meeting." Jared looked at me directly for the first time. "They were pretty unfair to you, weren't they, with the Office and everything. The acknowledgement surprised me. Yes, they were. I didn't really think about it at the time, he continued. It just seemed normal that I would get what I wanted. That's how it has always been. I know, I said simply. He sat down on my couch uninvited. So, what happens now? Are we still brothers? Or is this legal stuff going to make everything weird? Forever? The question caught me off guard. Despite everything, Jared was still my brother, and his role in our family dynamic was as much a product of our parents' behavior as anything else. We are still brothers, I assured him. But things will be different going forward. I need to be treated with respect, and that includes by you. He nodded slowly. I get that. I'm sorry about taking your monitor without asking, and for being loud when you were working. I didn't really think about how it was affecting you. It wasn't a comprehensive apology, but it seemed genuine. Thank you for saying that, I replied. After Jared left, I reflected on our conversation. Perhaps there was hope for salvaging some family relationships from this situation after all. The day of the meeting arrived. Brian accompanied me to the conference room where my parents waited with their attorney, a stern-looking woman in her 50s. The tension in the room was palpable as we all took our seats. Let's keep this civil and productive, Brian suggested as we began. We all want a resolution that respects everyone's rights and maintains family relationships as much as possible. My parents' lawyer outlined their position first. My clients acknowledge Adam's ownership stake in the property. However, they contest the application of rental payments during his residence, as there was no formal rental agreement acknowledging his ownership position. Brian nodded. We understand that position. Adam is not seeking retroactive rent adjustments at this time. His primary concern is fair compensation for his ownership stake. Going forward, my father interrupted. We cannot afford to buy you out at market value. The house has appreciated significantly. It would require a second mortgage, which we cannot manage on our current income. There are alternatives to an immediate buyout, Brian explained calmly. We could establish a payment plan over several years, or we could formalize Adam's ownership with a proper legal agreement acknowledging his stake and his right to a percentage of any future sale proceeds. My mother spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. What about Jared? This is his home, too. Jared is not a property owner, I pointed out, but I have no intention of displacing him or anyone else. I simply want my legal rights acknowledged and respected. The negotiations continued for nearly 3 hours. Eventually, we reached a preliminary agreement. My parents would make monthly payments toward purchasing my ownership stake over a 5-year period. The payments would be manageable within their budget, especially once they adjusted some unnecessary expenses. As part of the agreement, I would retain legal ownership until the buyout was complete, meaning any major property decisions would still require my consent. Additionally, Jared would need to contribute to household expenses through a part-time job, reducing the financial burden on our parents. As we prepared to sign the preliminary agreement, my mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. I never meant for things to get to this point, she said softly. We always thought we were doing what was best for the family. The problem, I replied gently, was that your definition of family often excluded my needs and rights. That has to change. My father nodded stiffly, a reluctant acknowledgement of the truth. In my words, he signed the agreement without further comment. As we left the meeting, Brian clapped me on the shoulder. Your grandfather was a wise man, he observed. He knew exactly what he was doing when he set this up. Yes, I agreed, feeling a wave of gratitude for my grandfather's foresight. He was looking out for me even when he knew he wouldn't be around to do it in person. The weeks following the agreement brought significant changes to my family dynamic. Jared secured a part-time job at a local electronics store, ironically learning more about technology from that experience than from all his streaming attempts combined. My parents began making the agreed-upon payments on time, gradually acknowledging the new reality of our relationship. Most surprisingly, my professional life flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The confidence I had gained from standing up for myself translated into more assertive participation in work meetings, and eventually a promotion to senior engineer with a corresponding salary increase. The path forward with my family would not be simple or straight. Years of established patterns could not be changed overnight. But for the first time, I was navigating that path from a position of strength rather than accommodation. And the difference was transformative. 6 months after moving into my apartment, I received an invitation to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. It was the first such invitation since our legal agreement had been finalized, and I approached it with cautious optimism. The atmosphere was notably different from my last visit. My father greeted me with a firm handshake instead of the distant nod I had grown accustomed to. My mother hugged me warmly, but without the clinging guilt trips of the past. And Jared, now 4 months into his part-time job, seemed more grounded and mature. "Welcome home," my mother said, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, welcome back for a visit." The distinction was small but significant. This was no longer my home, and acknowledging that fact represented progress in our evolving relationship. Dinner conversation was initially awkward, but gradually warmed as we found neutral topics to discuss. Jared talked about his work at the electronics store, where he had recently been promoted to assistant manager. "I still stream sometimes," he admitted, "but just for fun now, not as a career plan. Turns out I'm pretty good at sales and customer service." My father, who had been quietly eating his pot roast, looked up. "Adam, your mother and I have been doing some thinking since all this happened." I braced myself, unsure where this was heading. "We were not fair to you," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "For a long time, not just with the office situation. We had different expectations, different rules. It was not right." My mother reached over to squeeze his hand. "We thought we were being good parents by pushing you to be independent while giving Jared more support, but we see now how that looked and felt from your perspective." Their acknowledgement caught me by surprise. I had expected compliance with our legal agreement, but not this level of personal reflection. "Thank you for saying that," I responded carefully. "It means a lot to hear you recognize it. The property agreement actually helped us get our finances in order," my father added. "We should have been more responsible all along." Jared nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, Dad made me create a budget for the first time ever. It's actually kind of satisfying to pay my own phone bill now." I smiled at my younger brother's newfound maturity. "That's great to hear, Jared." After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, my mother brought out a small wooden box that I immediately recognized. It was my grandfather's, the same one where I'd found the deed. "We found this while reorganizing some things," she explained, handing it to me. There was a letter inside, addressed to you, meant to be given when you turned 21. "I'm sorry we never gave it to you." With slightly trembling hands, I opened the box and removed a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. I excused myself to read it privately on the back porch. "Dear Adam," the letter began. "If you are reading this, you have reached adulthood, and it is time you knew about the gift I have arranged for you. You own 25% of your parents' home, a fact they have been aware of since you were 13. This was not done to create division, but to ensure balance. I have observed how your brother receives preferential treatment, not from malice, but from your parents' blind spots. This ownership stake is your anchor, your security in a family dynamic that sometimes forgets your worth. Use this knowledge wisely, not as a weapon, but as a shield when necessary. And remember that true wealth is not measured in property, but in the strength of character that knows when to stand firm and when to extend grace. I am proud of the man you are becoming. Your analytical mind and kind heart will take you far. With love and confidence in your future, grandfather." I folded the letter carefully, tears blurring my vision. My grandfather had seen everything, clearly long before I had recognized the patterns myself. His gift had not been just the property stake, but the permission to assert my value in a family that had taken it for granted. When I returned to the living room, my parents looked at me expectantly. "Did you read the letter?" my mother asked hesitantly. I nodded. Grandfather was very perceptive. He always worried we favored Jared, my father admitted. We denied it at the time, convinced we were being fair. It took all this for us to see what he saw years ago, and what I lived with my entire life, I added quietly. My mother wiped away a tear. "We cannot change the past, Adam, but we are trying to do better now." And they were, in their imperfect way. The monthly payments arrived on time. Jared had begun contributing to household expenses. Most importantly, there was a new awareness in our interactions, a recognition that the old patterns had been damaging and needed to change. As I prepared to leave that evening, my father walked me to my car. "That apartment working out okay for you?" he asked. "It's perfect," I replied. "Having my own space has made a world of difference." He nodded thoughtfully. "Your promotion at work, that's impressive. Always knew you had it in you." The compliment was awkward, but sincere. Perhaps one of the first times he had acknowledged my professional achievements without qualification. "Thanks, Dad," I said. "That means a lot." As I drove home to my apartment, I reflected on the journey of the past year. Losing my office had been painful, but it had triggered a chain of events that led to greater independence, professional growth, and most surprisingly, the beginning of a healthier family dynamic. My grandfather's foresight had provided the leverage I needed, but the courage to use it had come from within. After years of accommodation and compromise, I had finally learned to stand up for myself without burning bridges completely. In my new apartment, I had created a home office even better than the one I had lost. My promotion had accelerated my savings plan beyond my original projections. And most importantly, I had established a new identity within my family, not as the reliable doormat, but as an equal member deserving of respect. The relationship with my parents and brother would always be complicated, carrying the weight of our past patterns. But for the first time, it felt like we were building something more balanced, more honest, and ultimately, more sustainable. As I unlocked the door to my apartment, I whispered a thank you to my grandfather for the gift that had changed everything. Not just the property deed, but the permission to value myself when others did not. The greatest lesson from this experience was learning that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean cutting ties. Sometimes, it means establishing new boundaries that allow relationships to evolve into healthier forms.